Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Development Activities meeting. I'm Wanda Wilson. I'm with Oakland Planning and Development, and we're your host for this evening. This meeting is about a zone change that is proposed in the Oakland neighborhood. It's called Oakland Public Realm E. And it's a development activities meeting prior to this going to the Planning Commission. A few things on how the meeting will run tonight. We will have a presentation on the text of the zoning ordinance, and we'd really appreciate if people can use the chat feature to put in your comments and questions. If you have feedback about what you're seeing in the proposed zoning ordinance, please type that into the chat. If you have questions about you would like to ask about more information, please also type that into the chat. We will verbalize those questions and comments that we see. And then we also will have a record of this, both the record of the chat itself and the meeting is being recorded, as you can see, and we'll also have notes that we type up as well. So there'll be lots of information for us to be able to record the discussion for this evening. If anybody is just on the phone, we will have an opportunity for people who are joining the meeting just on the phone to be able to unmute yourself and verbalize questions as part of the Q&A this evening. I think that's it on protocol for tonight's meeting and how we'll run the meeting. We have another meeting tomorrow night, which is our regular Oakland-wide meeting. That's tomorrow night, also at 6 o'clock and also on Zoom. We have two presentations, the UPMC Presbyterian Hospital Bed Tower. It's not the final meeting that they'll have before they go to the Planning Commission, but it serves as a development activities meeting for that development project. And Paramount Construction will be giving a preliminary perspectives on a property at 3339 Ward Street. And then our Let's Talk in Oakwatch meeting will be Wednesday, December 15th at 6. So please plan to join us for that meeting. I think next we'll go right into the presentation on the zoning ordinance. I think that was all the updates that we had. We have the text available, and to present the text, we have Councilman Bruce Krause with us tonight, and Mayor's Chief of Staff, Dan Gilman, I believe. So Councilman, I'll turn it over to you. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, Wanda.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yep, thank you for having me. I do have a statement from the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Dan Gilman, who was not able to join us this evening. It's brief, and so I'd like to read it in its entirety. This legislation creates an opportunity to expand green space, bring a new grocery store to Oakland, eliminate blighted properties, add walk-to-work housing, create new housing that is not aimed at students for the first time in years, and to create a safer Boulevard of the Allies. These are all things that have been repeatedly brought up as community desires, not just through the current master planning process, but also over the past 20 years. While the master plan continues, changes and developments regularly also occur during the process. And in fact, the Oakland master planning process recognized that and spoke to it early on in the process. When important positive opportunities for a neighborhood occur, you have to take advantage of the moment. As current unknowns of supply chain, interest rates, pandemic rates, and the global economy have shown, sometimes waiting 2 or 6 or 12 months can possibly kill an opportunity. It is our belief that this opportunity for Oakland was an important one, and that is why we have introduced legislation to help make this opportunity a reality. And that's the end of the statement from Chief of Staff Dan Gilman. When the legislation came over to council, and I'm sure many people that have tuned in are aware, members of council had some reservations about some of the content that we were given in the original legislation. And so with the assistance of my Chief of Staff, Brasha, who many of you know, and working directly with the legal counsel for the developer, Jonathan Kamen, we came up with some amendments to the legislation that we thought brought the legislation more in keeping with the Oakland Steering Committee, of which, my office and Councilman Lavelle and Councilperson Strasburger are also members of that steering committee. And so just to briefly outline the amendments that we made to the original legislation, I would like to propose them as they relate to District A, B, and C, and then some general comments, and then a piece on the bonuses that are being offered up. So the amendments that we offered up to District A was to set a maximum height without bonus at 60 feet. The maximum height that could be achieved with bonus would be 108 feet. In Section B, the amendments to that district were the maximum height without bonus would be set at 60 feet, and the maximum height with bonus is 120 feet. And as you and many that are tuned in tonight would know, that houses the hotel and grocery components. Excuse me. And then amendments to District 3, the maximum's height was set without bonus at 90 feet and maximum height with bonus at 160 feet. Some other things that we thought were important to include in the legislation: demolition plans that are not part of new construction must have a report, a study, or statement of the property's future use in keeping with established uses. And then as it relates to the bonuses that were being offered in the original version of the legislation, if the project does not provide satisfactory evidence of achieving the performance standards of each used bonus within 3 years of receiving its initial certificate of occupancy, then the developer shall be subject to a fine equal to 1% of the construction cost. If the fine is not paid within 30 days of the date it is imposed, then the city shall have the authority to revoke the certificate of occupancy for that building. So at this time, I would like to introduce counsel for the developer, Jonathan Kamen, who worked with us collectively to help bring these amendments to light. Jonathan, are you on?
I am. Thank you, Councilman Kraus, and thank you, Wanda, for hosting this development activities meeting. I wondered if it would be possible for us to go ahead and to share our slide deck. I think that would be helpful in sort of walking you through the benefits of the district and the many different features of the legislation. So if you can, is everybody able to see the slide deck that we're sharing?
We have the legislation up, and what we're focused on tonight is going through the zoning ordinance that is before us. It's a piece of zoning legislation, and it's that text is what we're going to review tonight.
Okay, so the slide deck that we have goes ahead and addresses the various features of the zoning legislation. I know that we have provided this to you earlier, Wanda, but we're able to share it. And this will walk through the hows and whys and the various features of the legislation. So if you could give us permission to share, that would be great.
No, I'm sorry. We're not going to, the focus of the meeting tonight is the zoning legislation that's in front of us. So we have that on the screen and we can go through the sections. That's what we're here to focus on this evening, and that's what we want to explain to people. is the ordinance that is being proposed, and that is what will be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and that is what is required to be reviewed at this development activities meeting.
All right, well, so if you know, I disagree with what you're saying, but if that's the way you want to run the meeting, it's certainly your meeting. And if you want to go ahead and scroll through, I'll be happy to talk about each of the districts for you. So why don't we just walk through each provision? So again, this first section, 90803D5, essentially deals with the purpose of the district, and this sets the overall boundaries. A couple of important things for you to note in terms of understanding this legislation is that this sets the goals, and these goals are significant and also consistent with the goals of the other SP districts that exist in Oakland, or excuse me, the other OPR districts that exist in Oakland, and also consistent with the way many of the SP districts are written. But if you look at the purpose that's in here, again, this is similar to the other OPR, A, B, C, and D districts. And again, one of the things I think we want to highlight is the desire in terms of the overall goals to provide different types of housing. Well, let me start at one, to encourage high quality redevelopment of property and improvements within the district, including portions of the Boulevard of the Allies, Bates Streets, Halkett, McKee Place. Again, one of the things that we've talked about is the importance of the need to bring a grocery store to Oakland, and this helps us to facilitate that. Two, to address the need for density, and one of the things that's important for density is that the creation of density also allows the creation of the many public amenities and improvements that we were planning on creating as part of this. That includes the greenways, the green spaces, and you need density to essentially support that. And one of the things you'll see as we work through the legislation is that there are requirements, I should say, for open space throughout the various districts that go ahead and match the density so that there is a significant enhancement to what we would call the public realm. In terms of three is developing the opportunities for various types of housing within the district. One of the things that we're very proud of is the focus on walk to work housing, and the fact that this is going to be a place that recognizes that Oakland is losing population and that we need to bring people back who want to live in Oakland and want to work in Oakland and have the ability for them on an affordable basis to go ahead and to do that. 4 talks about the establishment of safe and attractive pedestrian, bicycle, and transportation improvements. If I were able to show you the presentation, one of the things that you would see is that there's been a significant focus on enhancing the green spaces and the connectivity. The areas of the Louisa Street steps, for example, are in very bad shape. And the way that the environment has been structured today has been sort of disjointed and neglected, and we're hopeful that by creating this sort of overall design development plans and concept to the overall district, that we'll be able to enhance these type of improvements. And then 6 is to provide meaningful connections. Many of you may have heard Todd Rebord talk before about this being really the Oakland crossings, and that this is really a place where there are connections between neighborhoods, between the great institutions of Oakland and everything else. And one of the things that needs to be done is to look at this with a bird's eye view to see how you can go ahead and combine these neighborhoods and create these connections. And that's one of the things that we focused on with not just regard to our pedestrian enhancements, but also our proposed pedestrian bridge and also our Boulevard of the Allies improvements that we're talking about making, because all of a sudden that's going to turn this sub-district into something that meaningfully connects with the rest of Oakland. So working through, those are the overall purposes. Oh, no, back to, yeah, thank you. So as if we were able to present the presentation, you would see that there were 3 districts that we've talked about. There's a sub-district A, a sub-district B, and a sub-district C. And within sub-district A, that's essentially the area of McKee Place. And this first version describes what's there. And then permitted within that district is a number of uses that we think are consistent with not only uses that are permitted in the other Oakland sub-districts, but uses that would be permitted within this district that would be consistent and harmonious with the ultimate types of goals here. So you can continue to scroll down. And one of the things that, if you scroll down a little further, so here's the bulk regulations, and these are essentially the standards that go ahead and set the overall district. One of the things that I think is important to note is that this district requires at least 20% of the land within sub-district A to be utilized as urban open space. Again, one of the things that I think our team heard through the dozens of meetings that it sat through over the last couple of years in the planning process was the need and desire for meaningful urban open space within Oakland. And one of the things that we've sought to create here within this district was that 20% standard, which allowed that to happen. If you want to scroll down to the parking, one of the other concerns that we've had was discussion about a lot of different parking being sort of disjointed and not used in a meaningful way. Look, we're all hoping that as the world goes away from cars, that people can focus on more walk to work and biking and those types of things. But one of the things we wanted to make sure is that when we have parking, we wanted to make sure that it was screened and appropriately structured. That way, it's a consistent part of the neighborhood as opposed to something that is, an eyesore to it. In terms of signage, that just references the other districts. If you want to go down to the mixed use requirements, scroll down a little bit more there. So this is one of the things that is important to not only achieving density, but achieving what we would call high quality design and development within the district. And one of those things is a real focus on mixed use. And what the mixed use does is that has the ability to have all residential or with some levels of commercial and some levels of other uses within them. And that creates a healthier ecosystem, not just for residential operations, but also for commercial operations. What that also does is it creates the demand to support your grocery store and to support your other amenities that we're talking about having as part of these uses. Because, well, over 100,000 people come to Oakland every day to work. Many of them don't live and stay there. So you need to have these mixed use features to allow that to happen and to create the demand and also to allow people to experience the level of amenities and connections that we're talking about. You want to go to sub-district B? So this sub-district goes from essentially Halkett Place and then Halkett Street. Really, and again, I'm sorry I don't have the presentation to show you, but really it's the up to Louisa Street. And we see this district as also having a lot of the same types of uses as the Mckee District had, but a little bit more of a commercial focus. And again, these uses are very similar to what was up there in the previous district. If you want to go down, Wanda. So here we have, again, the various issues in terms of how we see the bulk regulations playing out, so to speak. In this district, we're talking about urban open space of 15% of the land. That's because, again, it's a little more mixed use. Again, we also noted that all structure parking should be screened from the ground plane. You can keep scrolling down. That's the same thing on the signs. And then we can go to sub-district C. Now this is the district, again, that is bounded really by Halkett Street on one side, Louisa Street on the other side, and then goes across the Boulevard of the Allies and includes essentially the Isley's building as it exists. One of the things that I think is important, and one of the things that we've heard, is the ability to have a meaningful connection across the boulevard. Some people have been very concerned about how you cross it. Some people have been concerned about safety and also being able to connect the neighborhoods together. Again, part of the inspiration for the name of Oakland Crossings. So what we had planned to do was to put in a pedestrian bridge to connect the one side of the boulevard to the other side of the boulevard. And also our plan is to create a neighborhood park on the Isley site, which will serve as both an amenity to the existing community on the Isley side of the boulevard and an amenity to the community on, call it the Halkett side of the boulevard. So this is also the district where we envision the most density, and also envision putting the grocery store at the Quality Inn site and being able to develop around that. So if you want to scroll down. And again, as these uses are a little bit more intensive, there's some more flexibility here for some more non-residential uses within the site. We're showing, again, as this is a larger district, 20% of that being urban open space. And because we think that that also is the type of situation where you'll be able to have people come and enjoy their lunch on the sidewalk cafes, and people be able to really activate the boulevard, which to this point has been essentially nothing more than a highway. If you want to talk about, scroll down a little more so we can get into the regulations that apply to all the districts. So the first is that any contiguous parcels in any district may be combined or subdivided as required. What we wanted to make sure was that as part of thoughtful master planning, that you were able to put the properties together in such a way that they made sense. So that's the purpose of that provision. In terms of the parking structures, one of the things that we were focusing on was being able to integrate this parking into buildings and into existing uses, so you just don't have garages. So that's one of the things that we talk about there, is the integration of those parking structures. The third that we talked about, and we added, and by the way, this language that we've added in terms of A, B, C, and D here, these are similar requirements that exist within the uptown public realm districts and other public realm districts for how parking is utilized. One of the things that we wanted to, there's always a question about traffic and demand, and one of the things that we wanted to add as a requirement here was that the requirement of what they call a traffic and parking demand analysis to be done, so that it would make sure that we were appropriately parking these uses as these uses came in. So instead of just having a generic sort of zoning code requirement, we wanted to make sure that the parking would actually be based on how it was going to be utilized. So this is an enhancement in terms of making sure that we're going to deliver what's required. And then the next one is deals with accessory structures and uses, and just says that those are permitted. The sixth deals with the ground floor height. We wanted to make sure that every building had a decent height to it, so that it was good with the pedestrian scale and the pedestrian public realm. So that's why we put that in there. And then number 7 talks about, again, dealing with active uses and active interaction with the pedestrians along the ground plane. So that has significant transparency, and also references down below, which we'll get to, the provisions about the preservation of the Isley's building. 8 talks about bonus height and how that's to be used. 9 requires design review for each of the building to be reviewed and criteria set forth in 922-10E2. 10 talks about how residential compatibility standards are not going to apply to this district. We're going to have, again, a mix of uses between residential and non-residential, so we needed to clarify that. But we did go ahead and pull out from the residential compatibility standards, essentially the operational standards that would go ahead and say that these buildings would be good neighbors. So if you look at the different ones that you have noted in here in A, B, C, D, and E, and I believe if you scroll down, you can see that there's more. Each of those standards are designed, lifted out of the other residential compatibility standards of the code to make sure operationally everything is harmonious. In terms of the language for 11, it talks about FAR, 12 talks about how the design process and design review standards are such that they need to fit into the context of Oakland. 13 talks about if you could scroll down so that stays on the screen. 13 talks about a very important feature, which is there is a lot of what I would say nostalgia and historical support for the facade of the Isley's building. What is apparent from anybody who has seen it is that that building has seen better days. One of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that that facade would be protected and preserved regardless of what the new structure would look like. So one of the things that we wrote into the code to actually protect that is that the facade was to be reused and preserved on all sides of the Isley's building. My clients have some significant experience with this. Recently did this on the Penn Highland building over here in East Liberty. And what they do is they take down each piece and then go ahead and restore it and clean it up and put it back so it looks the same on a new building. And then again, one of the things that we were able to do with this legislation was to write this in so that that is actually protected. 14 talks about the creation of essentially R&D services. One of the opportunities that we think is available within this district is, again, on a mixed-use basis for many of these buildings to house some of the cutting-edge research that's happening, and we went ahead and put that in as a special exception within the code, which means if somebody wants to come and utilize those uses, they have to go to the zoning board, but they are permitted so long as they meet the requirements. There have been a lot of misinformation spread about the closing of Zulema Street. So we wanted to write into the ordinance to make it very clear that Zulema Street would not be permanently closed for traffic until there was actually the ability for vehicles traveling on the Boulevard of the Allies to be able to make the left onto Bay Street. If we were able to show you the presentation, one of the things that we would show you is that we've had some preliminary studies and reviews done of the Boulevard of the Allies, and that there is an opportunity there to allow for that traffic movement onto Bay Street, which we think is something that people want to have happen and will, again, establish these connections between the neighborhoods. So that's why that's in there. 16 talks about our walk to work housing. And again, this is something we're very proud of, in that the walk to work housing is going to provide a place, a meaningful place for families and people who work in Oakland to be able to go ahead and live in Oakland. That's the concept of walk to work. And one of the things that we've talked about here is essentially how you create the walk to work housing. And what we've talked about is a minimum of 10% of those units within the structure will have walk to work housing. 17 talks about the urban open space, complies with the standards and the codes. The 18 talks about what we consider to be good urban planning, but just codifies that, which is you want to minimize curb cuts on the roads and channel the things. One of the things that are, again, our overall design allows that to do is to share garage space and share these amenities so that every building may not have to have its own parking garage. And that these items can be thoughtfully planned on a master planning process to allow this to happen. The 19 is again, a residential compatibility issue where we talked about articulated facades and not allowing dumpsters or loading to be visible from residentially zoned parcels. 20 talks about public infrastructure improvements utilizing green infrastructure, such as rain gardens, bioswales, and other best management practices. Again, looking at this district holistically, that's something that we believe in and we want to be doing, but that's something that this legislation allows the requirements for to happen. 21 talks about accessory uses and references other regulations. 22 talks about the requirement that PDPs be filed in accordance with the code for new construction, and the study as to future use. Again, that's something that has recently come in to many of the new zoning provisions the city has gone ahead and required, which we are now requiring in this. And then here we get into essentially the bonus provisions. So let's start and take a philosophical discussion about bonuses. The purpose of a bonus is to essentially reward the property owner and developer for doing higher quality development by giving them some extra height and some extra density. And remember, density is not something that is bad. Density allows for the creation of the amenities. Density allows for the creation of the grocery store and the various other uses that are there. But it's a carrot and stick approach, which is, okay, we'll give you the carrot of allowing a little extra height, but in order to get that, you have to meet these high quality performance standards. It raises the cost of the building, but it also raises the quality of the project. So these are some of the performance standards. Again, these come from other aspects and other areas of the zoning ordinance that have been recently adopted and codified by the city. So one of the things that you're talking about here is the building designed to meet LEED certification requirements. 2, or subsection B there, the proposal to have a grocery store. C has a hotel or motel, and D, more than 50% of the building is focused on being residential. So in addition to that, there's additional bonus requirements. And again, many of these come from other sections. We want to turn back up. So many of these other items come from other sections of the code, and you see the code section where they're referenced. There are performance standards for each of these aspects that we're talking about, but additional bonus provisions exist for on-site energy consumption, on-site energy dealing with generation, and enhanced rainwater, building reuse, neighborhood ecology, public art, urban fabric, transit-oriented development, walk-to-work housing, which is new to us, and then compost stations. So again, each of those criteria exists within the code, and we're merely utilizing them to go ahead and to enhance the projects that are being built. And then 4, this is the provision that talks about the penalties. So, there's been a lot of talk as to, well, what happens if you say you're going to meet these standards and you don't? This is a fairly punitive penalty that's put in that guarantees that, what is promised is what is delivered. So this was one of the requirements that came from Councilman Krause's office to say, look, if you're going to do this, then prove it and do it. And this is codified there at this point. Subsection D has a couple of other definitions. One that was missing from the code was spa. It is not in the code, so we wanted to make sure that it was in there so people understood it. And the second thing is walk-to-work housing. There's been a lot of discussion as to what does walk-to-work housing mean. So this has a definition of it. So it's a residential rental unit within a multifamily building or structure whose fair market rental has been reduced by an incentive provided by either the building owner or third-party institution so that the rental rate of the unit does not exceed 30% of the gross income of the occupants. And this incentive shall be made primarily available to employees and or independent contractors of a third-party institution. So one of the things that we thought was important in terms of the creation of a walk-to-work housing was that the housing opportunities be available not just for graduate students or professors, but we wanted to make sure that housing opportunities were available for the people who actually worked there, for the people who worked in the cafeteria, for the people who worked in various aspects of secretarial work or other work. So what we did was we left it flexible so that this is a place where families can come again and live. And this is a place where we're not just going to have a number of one-bedroom units that meet these requirements. So essentially what this has done is it's allowed for a flexibility of occupants and flexibility of users who can go ahead and take advantage of living in the great neighborhood of Oakland. So I know I've said a lot and walk through the legislation. Again, I apologize for not being able to show you the slide deck, but let me go ahead and happy to address some of the questions that have gone in the chat. I don't know if you want to
facilitate questions. Thank you. The process that we use is that the facilitator processes the Q&A. So that's what we'll move to now. Thank you for your presentation. So I'm going to start out with a couple of points that I just noticed on a couple of things that you said. One was that you stated that the purpose statement is consistent with the other purpose statements for the other Oakland public realm districts that we have today in Oakland. One that is specific is to protect the character of less intensive uses from impacts of more intensive uses. And Kathy, if we would scroll to the purpose statement at the beginning of the document, I think we would see that that is missing. Mr. Kamen, would you agree that that is left out of your purpose statement? And so therefore it's not consistent with the current Oakland public realm zoning districts that we have today?
No.
Yeah, so you didn't include that statement.
Right, but I think the point that you're missing, and I don't want to be argumentative about it, I think the point that you're missing is that, well, if you take a look at each of the purposes of the various districts, each of them are a little bit different. There is some consistency throughout, but each of them are a little bit different. And I think what we're talking about doing here is different than the other districts because we are very much focused on residential and we're focused on mixed use. And we're focused on creating some density within the district so that we can create public amenities and do all these other things that I just talked for about 20 minutes about. So,
okay, and then if we can,
if I can finish, please. From our standpoint, I don't think that that's necessarily inconsistent with what it is that we're looking to create because it's different. If it worked within the other existing zoning districts, then and the vision and the amenities could work, you would have them. But at this point, for what's consistent and what the purpose is for this district, I think that, well, that piece that you're talking about is not in here. That doesn't mean that it's not consistent with the rest of the districts.
If we could go to the uses in subdistrict A that's the Mckee District. This district is currently residential and it's a residential area all around it. It's currently zoned residential multifamily. It's a significant change in terms of the types of uses that are permitted. Educational classroom space in general could be 20,000 square feet or more. Large scale office of 10,000 square feet or more. Parking structures general is a minimum of 50 spaces. So that's a parking garage of at least 50 cars as a primary use. And also utility as a primary use. And the utility general from the use table in the zoning code is defined as generating plants, substations, switching facilities, water treatment plants, water tanks, facilities to provide gas, electricity, heat, steam, sewage collection, and rail lines. Why is that being proposed for a residential area on McKee Place?
So this is Todd Reedward, and I think I can answer that. I think we just have a difference of opinion as to what the future of Oakland should be. If you look at the current uses of McKee Place as we sit here.
Todd, if you could specifically answer the question about what is intended by utility general being included in this use table for McKee Place. That's the question.
Sure, I'm going to respond first to the comment because I don't think it was accurately stated. So I think we owe it to the audience to respond to your first part, the comments that you made. So I think our vision of Oakland is different than your stated vision of Oakland. The current uses of McKee Place are primarily student housing. We think that the vitality of Oakland going forward is mixed use development, where in all other similar type neighborhoods around great universities throughout the country, vitality is driven by mixed use. So we think it's entirely appropriate to have retail uses, coffee shops, maybe some offices, some people work at home, maybe there's some research done. All that can be done at the same time having residential above it. So we think that kind of segregating uses is sort of old fashioned and thinking about the past and not the future. The future of urban development, the future of vitality and attracting new residents to Oakland is mixed use development. Now, with respect to individual uses within that, as we all know, as we move forward, micro generation plants, on-site energy, solar arrays, those type of uses that are sustainable ways to look at development in the future should be permitted in this district. We want to be a leader in sustainability, not a follower. So we think it's important to have the opportunity to do these. Anyone can nitpick through these. There's no rational or economic reason why somebody would put a large generation plant there. I think you're just using scare tactics with the audience. But the real use here and the intended use here is to do good quality, high sustainable mixed use development.
I don't understand why utility general is listed. I simply don't. And, I think that there are questions in the chat that really speak to why residential compatibility standards are removed when they exist throughout the entire city. All city neighborhoods where residential zoning districts meet mixed use commercial zoning districts, residential compatibility standards apply. So there are a lot of questions about why would that be different here? Why wouldn't we have those apply just the same way that they do in other neighborhoods?
Sure. So this is John, and I can answer that for you. One of the things that I think is important to understand about residential compatibility standards is that there's actually two components to the residential compatibility standards under the codes. The one is that has to deal with essentially massing and how you have to go ahead and build a building. The other deals with essentially how that building operates as a neighbor. All of the standards, or I should say, almost all of the standards with regard to how the building exists as a neighbor are incorporated into that code. Although I can't think that there were any that we left out, so don't hold me to it. There may be one, but I think for the most part, all of those good neighbor standards are in the code, and I just went through all of those. The question comes to really massing and how the development can be done. And so that's the first part of the residential compatibility standards. And what those are designed for are pure residential neighborhoods. Those are designed for neighborhoods that are not mixed use. Those are designed for neighborhoods where you have a R1 or an R2 use that is right next to a commercial district. It's designed to allow.
So there is R1 right next to these districts that you proposed. So it seems that it would be perfectly applicable here to to have the residential compatibility standards.
So that piece that you're talking about, and again, I'm sorry, if I had my presentation, I could show you the map so we could see where that is. It's a very small piece. But again, we think that we've put all the good neighbor provisions in to protect those people who are living there. But we think also in terms of designing the massing of the building and designing a good quality, sustainable mixed use development, that there has to be some flexibility in it, which is why it's written the way it is.
I think we have several questions about concern about Oakland being affordable to families, and that's a high priority in the community. And we actually received some questions and some data in advance of the meeting from South Oakland Neighborhood Group, so I think maybe if Ty and Randy from South Oakland Neighborhood Group would like to give us a little bit about that of your data.
Before we do this,
it's a question about the bonus provisions for the walk to work housing. So Randy, I see your hands raised. If you'd like to go ahead.
Just as a point of order, I just want to be sure that I hate to interrupt, but just as a point of order here, we were not permitted to show our presentation. We have not been provided any of this data in advance. It's sandbagging to somehow show data that we asked for months and months ago that nobody would provide to us. So I mean, you're obviously going to do what you want to do, but this is really unprofessional and inappropriate to show data tonight that has never been shared with us in the past, despite our request for it.
Randy, why don't you go ahead?
Got you. Hey, how you guys doing? My name is Ty.
Ty, thank you.
Hey, thank you for having us. Just a little background on me. I'm the president of South Oakland Neighborhood Group, long-term South Oakland resident. Just some things that we've seen in my lifetime. I'm 27, so I know that a lot of other people in here have seen it and been seeing it for a long time. We've just seen the loss of countless individuals and families from South Oakland and surrounding areas due to lack of affordable housing, competing interest with private developers. We've seen many presentations complete with loopholes and promises to residential interests that have loopholes that render them ineffective. We've seen developers misconstrue corporate benefits, community agreements, and entire host of other things. So we just wanted to provide some data for you guys. So Randy, if you could take over.
Yeah, and I guess to be clear, I mean, a lot of this, you've heard me say before. This isn't some secret that we've been keeping. In fact, I think we've told you directly the things I'm about to say. So as many of you know, together with Ty and others, I help run after-school technology and arts program here in South Oakland, serving local youth. And over the recent decades, as rents have gone up faster than incomes of our residents, we in Oakland have lost many of our neighbors, replaced by newer and more wealthy neighbors. We've lost a substantial fraction of our families with kids under 18 as of the most recent census. Now, this is new data, but this is new because the U.S. Census just released it. But as of the latest census, we've now lost half of our families who are Black. That's over 2,000 of our neighbors. In the past years, as I've been helping run our after-school program together with Ty, I've seen many families of programs kids lose their housing, and all families of color. After being evicted, I've watched families try to find alternate housing in Oakland, but be unable to find anything that's affordable without a long waiting list. I've seen evicted kids and parents separate from each other on the curb. I've seen neighborhoods, parents, and kids lose possessions on the curb, having no place to bring them. As currently written, this bid to remove residential zoning in favor of much less restrictive zoning will, in my belief, result in tearing down many units of low rent housing to be replaced with luxury high-rise offices and luxury high-rise dwellings. displacing our current residents and bringing in new and more wealthy residents instead. In our city today, with our critical shortage of affordable housing, this move would destroy more affordable housing. And if it builds any new housing at all, it will be unaffordable to our current residents. And I request a real public engagement period where we can talk about modified zoning that will include requirements written into the zoning about the things we've heard in the Oakland planning process, including real long-term affordable housing, creating living wage jobs for current residents, and creating opportunities for our youth. In the most recent version of the legislation that we've gone through tonight, there's language with the apparent intent of creating affordable housing alongside the new high-priced housing. And the concept of using zoning to promote housing inclusion is a really important one. And it's being used successfully in Lawrenceville and in many cities across the US to reduce displacement. But as it's currently written, there are 4 loopholes, which I'll detail. Can we scroll, if we could, to the bottom of, so we don't need slides here, but I just need to
Yeah, we
scroll
could get
down.
back to the ordinance, Kathy.
Yeah, sorry. So if we can scroll down to page 12, like the bottom of page 12 in the ordinance. And I'll start describing. This is the definition of walk to work housing. So if we go down to page 12, the bottom of page 12 there. That's 11. The walk to work housing. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's it. The first loophole as it's written is that it says a minimum of 10% of households must pay no more than 30% of their income. That's a great start, but if there's no income qualification, that doesn't help reduce displacement at all. We could put up an expensive new apartment complex and people wealthy enough to afford it move to Oakland and sign leases. The wealthy new residents have no trouble affording the rents, so they're already paying less than 30% of their income on rent. But we've lost our existing neighbors who are now priced out, and the building owner didn't have to lift a finger to satisfy the requirement as it's written. As an example, in Pittsburgh, households who have a member working at any of our colleges or universities here, including community colleges, have an average income of about $70K per year. And what we see in Pittsburgh is that if you have an income, household income of $70K per year, about 95% of households with that income can already afford their rents. That is, they're paying no more than 30% of their income in rent. So what we're saying to the developer is you need at least 10% to be able to afford. And we're saying already, 95% are going to be. So it's not a requirement with any teeth at all. And in fact, the thing that we need to add, I think, has already come up in the comments. The Pittsburgh's inclusionary zoning, as deployed in Lawrenceville, creates affordable units for households at or below 50% of area median income. So in other words, you need to be able to say, we're making the affordable housing for people who don't have the large incomes. In other words, we're trying to protect our neighbors who are the first to be priced out in this place. So that's number one. Number two, if we could go to the top of page 10, I think there's like a number 16, which also talks about the walk to work. And my reading of this is saying that the affordability requirement is met in the first 12 months. There's nothing written in a deed. There's nothing written here about how long the affordability lasts. Could this just be an introductory one-time deal? In contrast, maybe it only lasts for the first year. I don't know. It doesn't say. In contrast, Pittsburgh's inclusionary zoning specifies 35 plus years of affordability. And so it's very important to spell out how it's being restricted in the deed and how long it's going to last. Back to the definition of affordable housing. If we look at, this is kind of the third loophole that I see in my reading. there's no requirement for affordable housing if the developer sells units as condominiums, which of course could then be rented out by individual owners, as we often see in Oakland. In contrast, the inclusionary zoning, Pittsburgh has and deployed in Lawrenceville has affordability targets for both rental and homeownership opportunities. And number 4, in my reading again, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm reading it wrong, is that after tearing down buildings, there's no requirement at all for any replacement housing in zones B or C. So only A has a requirement for minimum amount of housing. So there's nothing to stop a developer for tearing down zones B and C, which is the majority of the acreage, and build no new housing at all. And then the last thing I'll point out, and this one's pretty well spelled out, so it's not a surprise. It's just a limitation, which is that as spelled out, tenants only qualify if working for a specific employer. And now once again, it raises the question about who is this housing for? If it's too difficult for our residents to qualify, then we're back to displacing them. And just in summary, thanks for your patience. Community must be engaged around these zoning changes. Community needs to have input in these and express desires to evaluate. And the community needs to be served. So if you look at the Oakland planning process, a lot of the things that we're asking for here have been well voiced in that process. Thanks for listening to me. I hope that made sense, and I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has them.
Thanks, Randy. I would follow up with a similar question. I think that was a good overview. A lot of people did have questions in the chat about, what were the requirements for affordable housing, and, how would it actually be determined. So I think that's a good analysis for everybody to understand that it is very different than what we actually have in inclusionary zoning that we see in Lawrenceville's ordinance. One thing that we also have a lot of questions about performance bonuses. And one thing I noticed in the section, Kathy, if you could go to the section at the end, number 23, that is where the performance points are located. This is, and it actually says that it's pulled from section 915.07 of the existing zoning code. And I would just point out that this is pretty much pulled verbatim from that section of the zoning code for performance bonus points, except very explicitly not including number 4 in that section, which is affordable housing. So I guess I was wondering why that was the case when you pulled out very, verbatim those other sections here. That's it, Kathy. So all of these are listed here, and the one that's missing is the one that is affordable housing, which actually does have income requirements that's currently in the zoning code today, and think is most applicable. Derek, you could correct me if I'm wrong, in the Uptown zoning district. So I guess I was wondering why, if you used all these other ones, why that one wasn't included.
Yeah, sure. So we have a different view of the affordable housing that we're trying to go ahead and create within this district. And the Uptown district has a different view, as does Lawrenceville have a different view, as does different portions of the city have a different view. We think the walk to work housing is the best way to incentivize real affordable housing within this district. That's why we went ahead and put it in there. And we didn't think it was fair to double dip, so to speak, and also to have a program that we just don't think necessarily is going to create the best cross-section of affordability and the most units within this sub-district.
But we've also just determined that your definition through, the analysis that we just heard, that your walk to work housing doesn't actually have the real, either durability over time or actual income verification associated with it. So it's really not affordable housing.
Well, look, Wanda, I'm not here to debate you. Let me just say that I completely disagree with what you're saying. I actually think that this will create a far bigger range of affordability and a far bigger range of units that will be available for people across various spectrums of income. And, I heard what you and Randy said. I respect what Randy said, but I can tell you that we just have a disagreement about this. We think that this actually will generate the most income diversity and the most housing diversity within the district.
We have a question about why would we provide a bonus for a hotel? That is not something that is typically done and doesn't seem to be something that would be really needed. It's not something that a bonus would be needed for.
I think one of the reasons that it was there is, again, when you're trying to create a district where you're trying to go ahead and create density and demand to support both the amenities, the grocery store, and the other uses that are there, that a hotel is a good use that supports the mix of uses in a healthy development ecosystem.
Similarly, why would we provide a bonus just for building residential units? That doesn't seem like something worthy of a bonus, when in fact there's lots of market here in Oakland for building residential units.
Yeah, I can answer that. Again, Oakland has, unlike communities of similar size and closeness to higher education institutions throughout the country, Oakland has lost population over the past decade. So we need more people in Oakland to create the vitality. We have basically a population that's probably in the high 90% student population. So it's very, very important for the vitality of Oakland, thinking about the next 50 years, to change the mix of what is the residents in Central Oakland. It is not sustainable as we stand here today. There is no grocery store in Oakland today. There are no true amenities. There are no businesses that serve people that live full-time, year-round in Oakland, not students. So you need to change that dynamic, or Oakland's going to continue to go on a downward spiral, which it has been in terms of population loss. And it's going to be completely, if not 100% student population, which is not a sustainable, viable option for Central Oakland. So we need more residences. We want to encourage more development. We want to encourage more density. We want to encourage more amenities to come to Central Oakland. That's our plan. You may disagree with that. You may have a different view of the world, but that's our idea going forward. And we think the vast majority of the people, there are obviously a small minority of people that don't agree with us, but the most of the people that we have spoken with and that we have interacted with agree with that view of the world.
Well, if we could stick to answering the questions, we have do you have any response to, the question, what you're proposing will accelerate the loss of, will accelerate displacement of our lowest income families who are most disenfranchised in our community?
So let me respond to that. I don't believe, based on the information that I have of all the properties that are included in this development, that there are any people that fit in that category. I'm not aware of any. So I don't believe there's going to be any displacement on any of the property that's in this zoning district of anybody in that category. I'm not aware of any. If there are any, please point them out to me, but I am not aware of any. So I think that's a false narrative to say that our development will displace people. It's just not true of that category. The vast majority of all the units that are in this development are occupied by students.
We have a question about what is the rationale for pursuing zoning legislation outside of the Oakland plan process?
I think we've answered that 100 times. I think we could say it again. We've said it in every public meeting. We think that the Oakland plan is not a moratorium on development. It's been clearly stated. We think this is an opportunity that the time is right to do this now. We think it's consistent with the plan. We think it's the time to move forward.
We have a lot of comments about, your view is not the view of neighbors. So there are a lot of those in the chat that this vision leaves out the residents' vision. Then several comments throughout the chat about going back to the issue of scale and residential compatibility and just the change of character from residential areas to very high intensity commercial areas, that the scale of surrounding Coldheart with 160 to 200 feet buildings is not something that those residents desire, and that's throughout the chat as something that just to note that.
We don't agree with that. We've had meetings separately on a site with residents from Coldheart. It's there are people that want good quality development, and we work closely with them to make sure that we don't impact their quality of life.
There's a question in the chat. Walnut Capital controls low-rise buildings today. What stops you from renting those to families?
I assume you're talking about the properties on McKee Place, because as we all know, students and families in the same building are generally not compatible. That's our experience. So if you have buildings that are primarily rented to students, which they were for many, many years, or we require them they were, it's not compatible to have families live in the same building. So our view is that it's better to have higher density buildings that are compatible and have the amenities that families and young families want, or single people, whomever want to live there, that they can live in those type of units.
And I think that that's an important point that Todd made, Wanda, going back to the loss of population and the need to bring families in, which is a family who is looking for a place to live isn't going to want to go ahead and be surrounded by a number of students in the same building.
So what you're proposing is actually to displace a lot of current students. So there's also a lot of comments in the chat about, where will those displaced students go? What happens to the students? The displaced students come into the residential areas of Oakland and drive up the rental market. And these displaced students are causing issues, will cause other issues in the neighborhood. And there's a lot of that in the chat. And so what happens to the displaced students?
Sure, I can respond to that as well. As we all know, there's student housing projects going up as we speak today at the old Marathon gas site. The university is also, we know, considering additional student housing for their students. And we think that there's enough supply, there will be enough new supply in the system to absorb all of the students that we have. And again, there aren't that many of them. I mean, the relatively lower density buildings, have hundreds of residents, not thousands. And so we're talking about the ability to have those folks absorbed with the new product that's coming online.
There was also some questions about skepticism on the ability to enforce these enforcements that are listed in there about if you don't meet the test of getting your bonus. So I think I'll just note that there's a lot of skepticism around that, and there's a question about which department would enforce that.
In terms of the enforcement, I know there's some folks from city planning on the line. I guess they would be appropriate folks to, I do not know in terms of enforcement, which department enforces it.
There's also some comments about, that the density that we, density and the loss of why we've lost grocery stores in Oakland are not necessarily related to each other. A comment about other factors that have caused the grocery store to leave, the institutional expansion, and
obviously we just don't agree with that analysis. The grocery stores are driven by density. They have to have people that want to shop there. That's why they come to the neighborhoods.
So I'm just looking through the chat again. Again, a lot of comments on the bonuses seeming to be maybe you're getting more of a bonus than what is sort of comparable or consistent in terms of what the bonus really is, or how it actually is a bonus, and that they don't seem to be consistent. You're getting more bonus than what it actually is a benefit to anything. Then a question of, is this being rushed through before our new mayor is sworn in?
So Wanda, just to go ahead and answer your question on the bonuses, there is some flexibility on bonuses in terms of the different items that you can get bonuses for. But one of the things that Councilman Krause and Brasha put into the legislation when it was revised was that there's caps on that level of height. Or in other districts within the city, there's a lot more flexibility on how you can utilize the bonuses to increase the height. But here in these districts, there are caps on those. So even if you have a bunch of different bonuses, it doesn't matter because the height is still capped.
One more detailed question that I think I missed about when it comes to eligibility for walk to work housing, why was gross income chosen rather than area median income?
The standard that we used came from another comparable zoning ordinance from it. And I think the idea is to be able to have flexibility in how these different families are able to come and not have it solely based on AMI.
Then there are several comments that just generally speak to scale and changing the character, and that there are current residential neighborhoods, and that this seems to not take into account that there are existing residential neighborhoods right at the exact place where a lot of this new mixed use commercial, high intensity commercial uses are being proposed. So there's a lot of
let me respond
about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. We've described Oakland Crossings as a transformational development. We think that there's an opportunity now to really transform these sections of Oakland from what they are today into what they can be for the future over the next 50 years. Things are going to change. We think change is good. We think change is vital for the success of the city of Pittsburgh. As we all know, in the 50s and 60s, we had over 700,000 people in the city of Pittsburgh. Today, we're probably around 300,000 people. So we need to increase our population to have vitality. So density is good, vitality is good, mixed use is good, transformation is good. Oakland is not a place where people that are working people can live today. Central Oakland, I just want to make sure we're focusing on Central Oakland. There is not that opportunity today. That opportunity should exist in most people's point of view. It exists in all other major cities with urban institutions around them. Think of Boston, think of Atlanta, think of Philadelphia, what the transformation has done in their university districts. We need to do the same thing in Oakland for the vitality of Pittsburgh. We have the opportunity to do it. Things are going to change. If you can't embrace change, then we're doomed to failure. So I understand people's point of view.
There's a question about how much of the residential will be owner occupied.
Again, those issues have not been decided yet. I mean, the market speaks. We believe Oakland is most people moving to Oakland today to try Oakland out want to rent first. Then they have an opportunity once they've lived there for a few years to potentially look and buy. So you have to have a landing point for people. So we think the rental housing market in Oakland can be very significant for people that work in Oakland and want to live in Oakland. It's a great landing place.
Then there's also comments that, you know, there a comment in the chat from a working homeowner in Central Oakland. Now I'm just looking at some more recent items in the chat. There's a comment about, you know, fundamentally we need affordable housing together with new development. The affordable housing proposed in this legislation isn't required to subsidize any rents at all. We have to close the loopholes. Then related to the price of student housing, the type and pricing of upcoming student housing, which is needed to meet increased enrollment goals, could mitigate newer upperclassmen numbers, but I have a tough time believing that will cover the demand of older students who expressly move off campus due to lower costs and more freedom. Such large-scale development without this consideration is going to put a stronger chokehold on them. Let's see. Then additional items related again to scale, that you know, height at 4 or 5 stories might be more appropriate in the residential areas, and that, you know, why in the residential areas of Mckee and Halkett would we allow buildings that are higher than what's in the 5th and Forbes business district. And I do then, you know, somebody's commenting that maybe Blythe is trying to raise her hand. Blythe, if you can type in the chat, that's great. If not, you can unmute and ask a question. And then we'll see who else is on, if we have somebody on phone only. Let me look through the participant list. I see one person on phone only. So it's a number ending in 7875. Is that a presenter or an attendee? If that's you and you're an attendee and would like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. Okay, then that person's responded, no comments. Okay, thank you. And if my team sees anybody else phone only, please let me know, team. Then we had a couple of comments in the chat related to the comparisons. So we have one from Randy. You mentioned Kendall Square outside of MIT in the greater Boston area is a place where population is growing. But in that case, developers tore down abandoned industrial warehouses, not homes. It's easy to increase population when you didn't have anyone living there in the first place. So that's not an appropriate.
Again, I don't think we're tearing down anybody's homes that they're living in. I mean, these are rentals to students. Just remember that. And I don't agree with it. I've walked Kendall Square. I know Kendall Square very well. I just don't think that's accurate. There are some conversions of warehouses to residential there. There's other places where they've torn down smaller homes and things like that. So it's a mixed bag at Kendall Square. It's a large area. I've walked many, many streets in Kendall Square.
And I see a question about that there's a 15-foot bonus for 1 point. And is that considered an appropriate ratio for this area? Again, this goes into that same theme that is several comments similar to that one in the chat, where where community members are just simply asking about the type of bonus that is being provided seems overly, it's more bonus than what seems reasonable.
So the other areas of the bonus do range, other portions of the code have different levels of bonus, but I think the difference here is we have different caps on them. And the other thing is, in terms of the overall open space that we're having, I believe in many places ours is more in terms of open space. So I think what we were looking for was being able to have a decent floor to floor height to be able to develop something that was appropriate and good and functional and design appropriate, high quality urban design. But again, the overall density is limited by the caps. So that's your limiting factor on the bonus.
Blythe, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I would. My name is Blythe Runsdorf. I live on Lytton Avenue, and I've put in my time in various associations, and OPDC being one. And I'm interested that the presenters have been surprised by any of the pushback and disagreements about what you want to do, what we want to do, what they want to do. And I'm surprised by that, because one of the things that I am well aware of is that we start our processes like this with lots of meetings with the Planning Commission, with historic districts, because we've got we've got places around that are historic districts. We've got hospitals. There are, at least at this moment in time, 5 different plans being considered all over Oakland. The Oakland plan is one, which has worked for, I think we're into our 3rd year with that group, and it has yet to be, it has yet to even had public comment. To my knowledge, this may be the 2nd public comment with this particular presentation. The University of Pittsburgh has revised its master plan that still needs to come through all of the process steps. And let's see, Carnegie Mellon has got one. UPMC is also about any moment to present a remastered master plan for its kinds of things. And what I'm concerned about is, since you have bypassed all of the processes that have been set up, is that with your bypassing all of the processes that are set up before the last one, which was City Council, which is the last one, that what's going to stop everybody from bypassing all of the processes that are set up and have been set up? And if we can't go through those processes and give people a chance to actually respond to pieces of the proposal before it's finally proposed in final form, why do we need any processes at all? And that will go to the fastest way to lose the entirety of Oakland. And so I am interested in why the surprise you seem to be exhibiting as the pushback you're getting. I'm surprised that you're not getting more.
So I'm happy to, thank you for the comments. I'm happy to respond to that. First of all, I think we've had 6 or 7 public meetings, 2 in person, I think 4 or 5 on Zoom. We've promoted them. Unfortunately, OPDC did not want to promote those public meetings. We requested that they do, but they chose not to. So there's just been a very open, transparent process. We have our own website. We've reached out to the community groups. We met with OBID. We met with individual community members. As I said, we had a meeting on site where a lot of the neighbors from Coltard and Niagara Street came. So we've done a tremendous amount of community outreach.
I'm not talking about community outreach. I'm talking about the all of the pieces that you work with the government on. This is a change in zoning is a government kind of proposal. You're not government. I've known you guys since I was a newspaper reporter for the Post-Gazette when you started out in Monroeville. So I'm not naive and not knowing about Walnut Capital. That's not my point. But you're not a government organization and you've bypassed all of the steps.
Well, we just have a difference of opinion. We don't agree with your statement.
Go through our individual homes when we have to.
Let me just finish my sentence. We just don't agree with your statements. We think that's a false narrative that we bypassed any process. No process has been bypassed. This went through city council. There was an 8-0 vote to send it on to planning commission. It was fully in public view. It was fully transparent. Eight of the council members voted for it. Nobody voted against it, 1 abstained. So this is just the beginning of the public process. There will be many meetings. There'll be another public hearing at the planning commission, another one back at council, and then each individual project, each individual development within the district will have its own separate process through planning commission and its own separate hearing. So there's been no bypass of process. To the second question you had as to, why we're not surprised by anything. Again, as we've said from the beginning, the vast majority of the people that we've talked to, the people that have reached out to us, agree with what we're doing and applaud with what we're doing. There is a small group of people, we understand that most of them are on this call today, that don't agree with what we're doing, don't share our vision of the future of Oakland. We understand that. We have a different view. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. It's up to our elected officials and others to see what's best for the city and what's best for Oakland. So we understand your point of view. I think reasonable, smart, intelligent people can have differences of opinion. We don't have to be disagreeable about it. I don't think we've been disagreeable, but we can have differences of opinion. We have a certain opinion of what we view the future of Oakland. There's some people that have expressed their opinions in the chat and your opinions. We totally understand that. It's up to our elected officials and others to come and say, what is the best thing for the city of Pittsburgh going forward? And that's what we're planning to do in our process.
Yeah. It doesn't look like that.
We can probably wrap up. I'm not seeing any new questions. Let's see. We did have more comments and questions about, the scale of development is not favorable to Coltart and the rest of the residential areas around it. I think that that might be it. And I think we covered everybody on the phone. So we will put this meeting recording on our website. There's a project page for this zone change on our website. And when we have more detailed information about the Planning Commission meeting, we'll be able to post that there and let everybody know about that. And there'll also be meeting notes and available on the website as well. We have a survey form on the website, which you can provide more information to us about your thoughts about this zoning proposal. That would also go into what we would be providing to Planning Commission. So we would coalesce that information and provide that to the Planning Commission. We had this many people attend a meeting. We had this many people respond to a survey. So you can find, there's a link in the chat that Dave from my staff has just put in there that you could do the survey to give us more feedback. Or if there's somebody that you're talking to, a neighbor who would like to review the information and provide some additional feedback, that would work.
So Wanda, this is John. I just wanted to note that we'll post the presentation that we were intending to present tonight, the slide deck. We're going to post that to the Oakland Crossings PGH website tomorrow so that people who are interested in looking at more information and understanding what we would have talked about will have access to that as well. We want them to have as much information as possible.
And the zoning legislation itself, which is the only thing going to Planning Commission, is on our website right now. So people could be, but it's also on the city website on Legistar. but it's on our website as well that people could look at the document, which is the text of the zoning legislation, and take a look at that there. You could, what we've reviewed tonight. So thanks everybody for attending. Really appreciate all the participation. It was great to see so many Oakland residents come out and actively participate. So thank you so much, and we'll conclude.